Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. About 20 hours ago and just 3 days prior to the latest documentary on the Watts case airing on Netflix this Wednesday, Detective Dave Baumhover, the former lead detective, has broken almost 6 months of silence. On his blog mentalarmor.org, he's put up a post, "Don't Eat It," with a sort of a picture of a guy sitting watching television, I guess, and being spoon-fed information. I'm going to put a link to that blog in the description so that you can get the full story directly from that blog, so I can't be accused of spinning whatever he's saying. I'm going to respond to what he's saying. Broadly, I'm glad to see what he's saying. I'm glad to see him addressing Nichol Kessinger, and I'm glad to see him debunking conspiracy theories. We know that this has been the blight of this particular case, and we also know how many people have been caught up in that nonsense. And it's just unfortunate that the sort of setting the record straight has been so infrequent and so slow. It's allowed certain creators to gain momentum and for their audiences to really get caught up kind of in a frenzy. And so this has been a very timeous, putting people back on track from someone very, very close to the Watts case. So in his blog, Detective Baumhover, which is titled "Don't Eat It," and this is referring to the media, I think, and social media, Detective Baumhover provides his reasons for not granting interviews and why he disagrees with full transparency in true crime. So I'm just going to quote one paragraph from that blog. This is from Detective Baumhover, and this is verbatim. I'm not changing anything he's saying. I'm not leaving anything out. It's from one particular paragraph in the blog. As I say, you can read the full blog. The detective writes, "Many people believe that information which is made public to be more transparent somehow stops corruption and satisfies their need to know everything. Perhaps it does initially, but I present to you the opposite is also true. The more information released about a topic allows more opportunity for it to be spun, twisted, and completely reformed to meet someone's opinion and or provide monetary gain. If you're paying attention, you'll see it every day in the media, regardless of whether you lean left or right politically." End quote. There are quite a few paragraphs that are worth quoting from there, but let's just deal with this to begin with. Baumhover initially acknowledges the potential of investigative facts to stop corruption. So in the beginning, he's kind of saying, yes, it does work. But transparency stops corruption initially, he says, and satisfies the public's need to know everything. But then Baumhover makes the case that the opposite is also true. I think it's naive to suggest there isn't massive corruption present in today's world. I also think it's naive to try to minimize the corruption going on. I think it's a massive problem. And that a major way corruption occurs is through the media and through how information is spun, right? If the media is a conduit for the corrupt, and let's use YouTube as an example. If YouTube is a conduit for the corrupt, it can also be used to channel the truth. And that applies to YouTube or any particular publication or the media in general. If it's conduit for corrupted information, it can also be a channel for the truth. You know, I've worked for a big media company, and in a real sense, the media is like a dumb spoon. It simply serves up what it's given to serve up. So why not the truth? I don't think it's rocket science to say the way to drive out corruption is by refusing to say anything about it. I don't think the way to stop corruption is by adding to the darkness. It's by shining a light on a subject and driving out all the shadows and ambiguity. That's not hard to do. It's not hard to make a singular, unambiguous statement, such as this blog from Baumhover. You may remember the district attorney, when Watts was kind of being sentenced, he said something like, the spotlight is now shining not on Shanann, which was a reference to Watts's giving a false confession. He was saying the spotlight now shines exactly where it's supposed to. The importance being that there is a spotlight, that you shine a light onto something and you expose it for what it is. And as soon as you turn that spotlight off, the light is gone and the shadows are back. So, just as Baumhover seems to see much of the media as corrupt, and some people seem to see the police as corrupt, clearly not all media are corrupt and not all policemen are corrupt. There are good people out there, and there are good people who do the best they can with what they can. They mean well. And, I think an interesting question is, are the majority of people good? And I think the answer is yes. I think the majority of people are good. Just as one could say the majority of nature is good. You look at forests and prairies and mountains and so on, and we see something that is good. There are aspects to nature that aren't good, like earthquakes and volcanoes, but there's also replenishment in things like that. It does feel like the majority of people are bad just when we read the news, when we listen to the news, when we watch television. It feels like that. But I think when you look at the suburbs and you look at people in a football stadium and you look at the entirety of the human story, it feels like most of it is good and most of it wants to go in the right direction, doesn't it? So it's a pity that you have a few voices that kind of mess it all up for most of us. A few people who, where there's corruption or crime or whatever, and they kind of mess it up. If you think of a community of, let's say, 100 people, and one of them is a thief breaking into the houses, it doesn't mean everyone in that community is a thief. It means one person is, but it does mean everyone needs to lock their doors, doesn't it? And of course, if that community talks to one another, talking about the people in that suburb talk to one another, you're going to expose the rot much quicker than if everyone just locks their doors and stays at home and shuts up. Am I right? So there are good people out there, and there are good people who do the best they can with what they have. But don't allow this one burglar to control the narrative. Don't leave ordinary society left to muddle through. So if you had one policeman on the trail of this one burglar, doesn't it help that entire suburb to sort of say, this is the burglar, this is who he is? I know some of you think that it's a foreign faction. No, this is the true state of affairs, and you can really do a lot of good through that. So this is where I disagree with the detective. Just as criminals and victims' families may express a hatred for certain individuals associated with a particular crime or case, it might be a particular prosecutor, it might be a cop, it might be a specific journalist or an opportunistic author. What they fail to see are the vast swarms of people highly invested in these cases, in these stories. So, you might hate the prosecutor, but the prosecutor is working on behalf of it might be a prosecuting authority or the state or whatever. You might hate the journalist, but the journalist is employed by a media company. You might hate the author, but the author is attending to the interests of a whole group of people who want to know what really happened. That's kind of what's going on. And so I think it's a kind of a cynical and contemptuous transference to hate and blame these individuals who actually represent much larger groups. And these people and groups wouldn't be doing what they were doing. They wouldn't be involved if there weren't other people interested in it, if I can put it that way. A journalist doesn't just write about a particular story because he wants to. He gets told to cover it by an editor, and the editor isn't necessarily told to cover it by anybody else. He looks at the demands of his market, of his audience. And so to some extent it is the ordinary people out there who decide what we are interested in. And shouldn't that be acknowledged? Shouldn't we acknowledge that there is some merit to what society is interested in? Or do you want to determine, no, you shouldn't be interested in that. You should change your personality. You should concentrate on rather playing computer games or watching the Kardashians. Don't be interested in this. So should someone else dictate what society, what interests society? I think I see it a completely different way. I think what interests society tells us a little bit about what is going on in society. What interests society tells us what is at the heart of society, what is hurting society, where society needs healing, what resonates with society. And the chances are what resonates with society often resonates with you. They work both ways. People are part of society. Individuals are part of society, whether they admit it or not. You are just one little reflection of a greater group. And the greater group is to some extent reflected in one person. And all these people, all these different voices are different manifestations of society. And you might say, yes, but something's missing. You're not reflecting my view or what I know. Well, then get out there and make your voice heard. That's really what this is about. It is what narrative ultimately evolves out of this. Is it the truth? Is it authentic? And the answer, sadly, is it's often not the truth. It's typically not the truth. It's usually not authentic. And so what you're going to do about that? Shrug your shoulders, because you are right to say that that's the case, but what you're going to do about it? I don't think the answer is nothing. In the Jodi Arias case, people targeted the prosecutor, Juan Martinez. Is he what is wrong with the Jodi Arias case? So if you had another prosecutor prosecuting Jodi Arias, what then? Would that solve the problem? Isn't the problem in the Jodi Arias case Jodi Arias? And isn't the interest in the Jodi Arias case an interest in someone who is like a chameleon and who lies about everything? And isn't Jodi Arias representative of society in a basic way? A chameleon society, a chameleon media, chameleon politicians. And just because it's reduced to this one person doesn't mean people are ravenous and insatiable and evil and greedy. It means it's resonating with reality. It's just a very good example of what we see in the real world. So what I think, you might even have victims' families who just can't stand this person or that person. But instead of getting angry with this or that creator, I think you should acknowledge that there are huge amounts of people who are interested in what particular people say. And that is really where you could say the problem lies or the solution lies. Look at these vast swarms of people. Why are they so invested in this? That's where you need to address your concern. Look at these people. Why are they invested and how can you deal with those investments? And look at what is happening. Netflix is making a movie. This channel makes a movie. That channel makes a movie. All of what that reflects is the high-profile nature of the Watts case, even without a trial, even without the mainstream media being involved. the mainstream media not being involved and all the people at the heart of the case not being involved is, in a weird way, driven the case to social media and to kind of, let's call it, alternative media. And look where it's gone. It's become a tense, poisonous, toxic environment. It's an environment that deserves and needs like a light to be shone over it. So, again, you could argue that people's appetites are at fault. Why are you interested in that? Why aren't you interested in gardening or David Attenborough? Or that the masses shouldn't be interested in what the masses are interested in. But then you're arguing against human nature rather than acknowledging it and addressing it. It's like me arguing against your human nature, saying, why are you being so sensitive? I think the more important question is how those sensitivities play out and how to understand how it works and how to address that, not arguing against it, not arguing against something that is already self-evident. So where the detective has a cynical view of this, I have a more sympathetic view. I'm talking about maybe a cynical view of people's interest in crime. I see it a totally different way. I see people's interest in crime speaking about how they've been wounded, about their desires, about their lot in life. They may not commit crimes, but they may be similarly hurt, exposed, deceived, whatever. And through a particular case, they get to think about some of these things and deal with some of these things. And you might say, well, surely you can do it, you can read a story once and then move on. I think what is important to bear in mind with the Watts case that is different to so many other cases is that Shanann Watts' social media is so, there's so much of it that it has really sketched this family in 3 dimensions. You see them inside their home, you see them alive, talking, laughing, crying. You see them together. You see them as real people. And because you see them as real people, you have both this sort of thing of, well, what actually happened to them? That's sort of hidden. You don't see the dead bodies. You don't have a trial. You just kind of have this one side where you see them living happily ever after, and then you find out that they've all died. And then it all disappears. And that's supposed to make sense. It doesn't make sense. And so people are thinking about it. And it has an impact on our own realities. What about our fairy tales? Are our fairy tales valid? Are our realities real? What is the impact of social media going to be on our families? What is the impact of multi-level marketing on my income? Are the safety protocols of the oil industry or the company that I work for, are they going to protect me? How should I get divorced? How should I, if I conduct an affair, should I tell everyone about it? How transparent should I be? And that's quite an important question here, is transparency in terms of everybody. Should Watts have been more transparent? Should he have said to his wife, I want to get a divorce? And the answer seems to be yes, doesn't it? So why didn't he? So the same kind of lack of transparency with Watts and his wife, and Shanann in terms of what is really going on with their debt, and Nichol Kessinger with her having an affair, is kind of going on right through this whole case. Everyone's holding back what's really going on. In other words, everyone's not being very transparent. And then you have the detective himself saying, yeah, that's normal. You shouldn't be too transparent. It kind of makes sense in the sense that you're protecting certain interests, maybe your own, but actually it's not. I think the one thing that you can't be too transparent about is the truth. And that is why when you go to court, you have people cross-examined, you have the media present, you have journalists present. It is a public spectacle. But the whole idea is that it is done in full view of the public, and there should be no place to hide. What is happening is you should tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And you on the record, and you have a jury listening to it, and it is important that you speak up and that everybody hears you. It's important that you are totally explicit about the details, that you're totally explicit about the evidence. You want photos, you want everything in very clear files, and anything that's not, if there's any doubt, the defense jumps all over it. So you want to be as explicit as you possibly can be. And I know about the difficulty in getting the truth out there, because I've sat through long court cases, and it seems like it's so easy to lie and so hard to tell the truth. And so when you don't tell the truth, when you say, well, let's rather, why do we need to be transparent? Aren't you giving the prerogative to the liars? So I do have a more sympathetic view that the truth deserves to be heard and needs a helping hand in a way. In a weird way, there's a saying, by the time the truth ties its shoelaces, a lie has run around the world 3 or 4 times already. That's really true. But on the other hand, the truth can also stand up for itself. The truth is often ultimately self-evident. I think something like Nichol Kessinger and her lack of involvement in this case, I think it's self-evident. That's why you've got to argue it and argue it and argue it, but ultimately it is self-evident that she wasn't involved. And a case like the Patrick Frazee case shows what it looks like when a mistress is involved. There would have been marriage on the cards, there's an abortion, there's a long period where you get invested in the other person, and you don't have that with Nichol Kessinger. So the Patrick Frazee case is a great case to look at what an authentic scenario looks like, where a mistress definitely is involved and she admits it, and it's, she cleans up the crime scene and she's present and all that kind of thing. That's what it looks like. But it goes back years. It's years of people knowing one another. There's just not enough investment if you've known each other 6 weeks. There's just not enough evidence if there have been no witnesses seeing these people hanging out. Right? Anyway, that's kind of a separate issue. Jerry Maguire once said, just to come back to the fabric of society, like I said, I'm quite sympathetic to that. And people who know me know I take quite a hard line in true crime. I try to be quite disciplined about it. But I do think there are tears in the fabric of society. We're feeling it right now. I'm not even in America, but I see the fabric of society being torn in America. People don't know who to trust. They don't even feel that they can trust law enforcement. They don't feel they can trust the media. And why? It's because the truth tellers and the truth are being clouded, shrouded by the liars and the deceivers. The tears in the fabric of society are seen in crime. Crime exposes the tears in the fabric of society, but there are still tears that we don't see, where people are suffering in silence, in unhappy marriages. Even where there are no crimes, society needs healing and needs to know itself. In true crime, some people get to explore their own situations, though perhaps not quite as fraught or desperate. It's easy to be cynical about this. As Jerry Maguire once said, we live in a cynical world.
We live in a cynical world. A cynical world. And we work in a business of tough competitors.
He's right. But right after that, he reaches out to Dorothy in front of a divorced women's group, a cynical world in itself, and tells her, I love you. Detective Baumhover, I'm not sure if the world, especially the world of true crime, needs more cynicism or less. Baumhover refers to today's society and people who want to know all the details about anything and everything. He's right. But people deserve better. Who's going to give it to them? So I want to talk about what I call the three hands of society. On the one hand, society works by taking disputes and controversies that are at a certain level. For example, criminal offences to trial. There's some things that absolutely need to be public. A wedding is an example. You profess to the world that I take this person to be betrothed to, and everyone needs to know about it. This is my commitment. It's a public commitment. It's also a private commitment. But the point is, it's important to be transparent about it. It's good for you, it's good for your partner, and it's good for society. And it works the other way around. If society knows about it, it's good for you. You could have some misunderstandings. In court cases, it's really important that they're public, because it determines what the reality is going to be in terms of the law regarding people's lives, and what is going to happen in similar situations with other individuals doing the same thing. Trials are public, and in today's society, high-profile trials double as a kind of public theatre. And you have some people who find this offensive. I don't want people to be interested in a court case. I think it's offensive and vulgar and horrible and whatever. So what do you want them to be interested in? Would you rather they watched Pokemon or Harry Potter or went to watch a movie? Would you rather people didn't know what happened in a criminal case and didn't care about it? Is that what you'd prefer? There's a saying I've often heard inside the courtroom: justice must be done and seen to be done. It's not enough for justice to be done. It's not enough. It's not enough just to get married. Just to say to someone, I will love you till the end of time. It's not enough. It must be seen to be done. And that is where the interests of society come into it. Society must see that justice is done. Otherwise, it's justice from whose point of view? Society must see that someone who's married is married and stays married and acts like a married couple. You as a married person, you have obligations towards one another, but also to that society. In the Watts case, justice was done, but it wasn't seen to be done. And that's something maybe the detective, if he was talking to me, might argue and say, no, of course it was seen to be done. He went to trial, he was sentenced, justice was seen to be done. Well, not according to Chris Watts's parents, who felt like in the lead up to the sentencing, they were saying they didn't have access to their son, and they felt the plea deal was coerced. And based on my research, the plea deal was in the offing in August already. So why wasn't the public told about that? So that, to make sure the plea deal happened. Well, what is the threat to the plea deal? Was the threat that if Chris Watts knew that the deal he was taking was kind of ridiculous? I mean, I think he's where he's supposed to be, but he really wasn't getting anything except maybe he was avoiding the embarrassment of himself being on trial. But I don't know how he feels about that now. I think many people will say in the Watts case, justice wasn't seen to be done. And the huge amount of social media from Shanann Watts is paralleled or mirrored in the discovery, the video, the body cam and all that. That's the investigation side. It's not justice. It's not justice being seen to be done. We don't know. We never saw Watts admitting to the crimes in court on the 6th of November. There's no footage of him in court saying, I did all that. I'm certainly not saying that he didn't say that. I'm just saying that it wasn't seen to be done. But that's not so much the point, is that there needed to be a trial in this case, where someone like you, the detective, would have stood up in court and spoken about all sorts of things, including Nichol Kessinger's lack of involvement. That would have been addressed in court a long time ago. It serves a public good for a society to know that there is justice. It offers relief. It satiates the hunger for victims as a group. So if you have people in society who feel victimized, they get confidence that there is such a thing as justice. And criminals get a sense of intimidation or lack of confidence or inadequacy, that if you do something, you're going to be tried in public. The opposite, it works the opposite way as well. If there's justice behind closed doors, doesn't that favor the criminal? Because a criminal who has justice behind closed doors can then be released back into society and nobody knows who he is or what he did. But if you've exposed him in court, he can't just go back into society. And in other words, it discourages recidivism, the repetition of criminal behavior. It encourages accountability and forgiveness and fixing what's broken. So true crime offers relief. It presents fables that can be described as cautionary tales to some people. Some people are, I think, quite happy in their lives and don't need to think about some of this stuff, but some people clearly do. And for them, these are modern parables, perhaps. People come together around the water cooler of true crime. Sometimes you have a true crime case that is so big that it galvanizes an entire nation. In America, it was the O.J. Simpson case. Also, to some extent, the John Benet Ramsey case. It's something that an entire nation can live with. It can be part of the narrative fabric of a society, where when you think of Christmas, you think of John Benet Ramsey. So it can reflect real issues, and they are abundant. There are a lot of issues facing us today. There's the parable of a bad mother, Casey Anthony. The parable of a woman scorned, Jodi Arias. The parable of arrogance and a fall from grace, O.J. Simpson and Oscar Pistorius. And the parable of Paradise Lost, Chris Watts, Scott Peterson, John Benet Ramsey, Madeleine McCann. Perfect families that somehow disintegrate. There's much to learn from all of these stories. So long as we're on the path to find truth, we find meaning too. It doesn't help the truth when those closest to it guard it or have become so inured to what they know, they treat their own knowledge with contempt. I submit that Baumhover sharing his truth, trusting his truth, not in a blog but in a more complete and committed format, may actually do him good. On the other hand, society does spin the uncertainties into conspiracies. So get rid of them. Society has a need and opportunists try to fill it. That's a given, and it's getting worse over time. Social media conspires to leverage those opportunistic messages, and many reptilian brains respond accordingly, like gamblers transfixed around slot machines. But I don't think spinners can stand up to actual sources getting the record straight. That's easy to do. Social media has flattened the media landscape, and there are good journalists out there that report simply on what they see in front of them. Colorado has many court reporters. Choose a journalist you know, or one that someone recommends, perhaps a family member or someone credible. Set rules for what you want known and how you want it known. Or write a book. have someone write your story. The third hand to acknowledge is society itself. Society deserves the truth. Trials are public for that reason. Individuals deserve to know what the truth looks like. I've attended several trials, so I know how hard one has to work, even in a courtroom, for the truth to prevail. A prosecutor has to be on his toes. He has to consider counter moves, counter intuitions, and counter intelligence. As a true crime author, when you sit through the minimizing of a perpetrator's involvement, and yet you've seen the autopsy photos, you feel the schism between the truth and the lie, and it's unacceptable. I can tell you in the Oscar Pistorius case, I've seen the autopsy photos of the victim. It's something that's burned into your head. It's something that you both treat with revulsion and that you wish everyone else could see. It's something that I'm sure the perpetrator is glad that no one can see. No one can see his handiwork. It's something that he tries to minimize by washing the blood off himself and cleaning the crime scene. And so what is that doing is it's varnishing the truth. It's making the truth seem different to what it is. And that is why the truth needs to be the truth. In the Oscar Pistorius case, just to give you one example, you have 5 different witnesses saying they heard gunshots and screaming. And then the defense attorney says, well, he actually also hit a bat against the door. Are you sure you didn't confuse that? And so you immediately have this muddling, this smoking up, this confusing of what people heard happened. And ultimately, in the beginning, Oscar achieved what he wanted. He got away with murder. He was able to render his victim invisible. She said nothing. She wasn't seen. And I made it my job. I made it my mission. That was the first high-profile case I worked on, to make her voice heard and to bring her to life and to turn her into a three-dimensional person. Everyone saw Oscar, and he was the celebrity, and it was easy to forget about Reva. And I made it my mission to bring her to life, to show her and to show her experience behind the door. And that is ultimately, after a long trial narrative, that is ultimately what the judges saw. There were 5 judges who had to decide his fate, and they finally saw it from her perspective, what it was like for her to stand in that small little cubicle with 4 bullets being shot through a door that was effectively like paper. And you could argue, what was Oscar doing? Well, what he was doing was he was pulling a veil over Reva, that you didn't see her. So you just saw him, and you saw him sniveling and vomiting, and that was very distracting, and that was very loud and, how can I put it, obvious, explicit. Him crying and vomiting and being dramatic. But all of that was a distraction from the silent Reva, who couldn't speak for herself from the grave. And who was going to speak on her behalf? At trial, virtually no one spoke for Reva. And so who is going to speak on behalf of the victims? Many disparage the interest in these cases as voyeurism and pigs feeding from the trough, but I submit that it's much deeper and much shallower than that. High-profile cases become high-profile because they resonate in some way with a society and with a person. Baumhover himself felt so close to the subject matter of the Watts case, also having young children of his own, he suffered PTSD. We know that because of an interview he gave to the Denver Post. So he does give interviews. He does raise his voice, as he has in the most recent blog. Some cases awaken the PTSD in society. And I would like to believe my books on the Pistorius case had a small impact on the case, the verdict and the sentencing, eventually being overturned. There were a couple of appeals in the Oscar Pistorius case, and every time the sentence became more severe, the verdict became more and more severe. So in other words, in the beginning, there was an underappreciation of what he did. As it became more and more transparent what had actually happened. Why does it take so long for things to become transparent? And even if things are transparent, why do they become unclear over time? Some cases offer the opportunity to learn about ourselves and society. Society wishes to know itself, just like people wish to know themselves, even though large components of that society may be unconscious or facile. So you might really dislike a particular creator on YouTube, and you might really dislike his followers or her followers. But they are simply a expression of the kind of people that are out there. I see a very authentic thread going through true crime, and it tugs at the very root of man. That's how I see it. It asks who we are, and through a particular criminal answers it. Some of us might be like Chris Watts, an introvert. Others might be like Shanann, sort of constantly on social media. As a controlling person, a very kind of expressive person. Some of us may be like Nichol Kessinger. We might be, how can I put it, unsuccessful in our love lives, trying to find a way to a happily ever after, trying to find the right person for ourselves. We don't like to admit it, but in some ways we identify with both perpetrators and victims. We identify with their weaknesses, their darknesses, their desires, their deceits. A lot of what is going on in true crime now is tribalism. People form groups. It's a way of dealing with alienation and isolation. Well, I'm not part of that group. We believe the same thing. And I don't think they necessarily care that much about the truth as they like belonging to and being part of a conversation and achieving significance through that. I don't think it's necessarily about the truth. But it should be. Some people are comforted in a strange way to know they're not alone. They are not wolves crying out in the wilderness. There are others married unhappily ever after, or unfulfilled, or seeking escape or respite. True crime, a genre the detective seems to disparage, offers a safe place for people to try to understand real life. And some people don't. Some people don't understand real life. They don't understand who they are. They don't understand people in their lives. They don't understand their situations. They're overcome by anxiety or stress or a particular scenario. Maybe it's debt. Maybe it's a cheating spouse. Maybe it's their own feelings of disquiet. True crime provides a scenario and tests our ability to understand other people and how the world works. Let me just say that again. True crime, for example, in the Watts case, we have a scenario and it tests our ability to see reality in the Watts case. And my impression is that most people can't see the reality in the Watts case, which shows you to what extent people need not only the truth and to know the truth, but they need to understand that they have a difficulty in seeing reality. And once you come out of that kind of denial, there's a sort of humility, and then you might feel like, wow, I've learned to be less arrogant about myself. Society overall might become less arrogant. Society might realize, wow, I was actually wrong about that. Something that is happening right now coronavirus. Can you imagine if society goes, oh shit, you know what, I was actually wrong about that? Or climate change. Oh, actually, that's what reality is. And why do we not know the reality on things like coronavirus and climate change? Lack of transparency. Some of it's deliberate. So some people are deliberately hiding information. It's all the more important to, or deceiving, it's all the more important to come out and be transparent and tell the truth for those who know the truth. And now it's not difficult. There is YouTube. There is social media. You can make your voice heard. So why don't you? I wonder whether Detective Baumhover would accuse me that I'm now spinning whatever he said. But I do think true crime tests our ability to understand other people, and that there is a way back out of brokenness, dysfunction, and despair. All my work is about finding authenticity through our ability to interpret the world and ultimately not get lost in translation or lose ourselves in the gyre. The reason I became a journalist and a photographer and an author was that I consumed the media and I was very dissatisfied with it. I thought I could do it better, meaning more authentically. And that's not to say that I thought the media was lying, just that they weren't able to appreciate the meaning and the value and also the context of what they were talking about. It was very shallow and very kind of one-dimensional. For example, the Watts case, where you feel the meaning is lacking, is someone would say, okay, so why did this happen? Who is he? Oh, well, he was a narcissist. That kind of thing, if I'd come across that, it would frustrate me because I would say that's not why it happened. You can clearly see he's not a narcissist. You can clearly see the reason, well, maybe not that clear, it does take some understanding. It's got to do with other personality aspects, and that would frustrate me. And so I would feel I can do a better job at getting to the authentic aspects here than a lot of other people. I found what I was seeing in the media in general lacking, devoid of meaning, and weak. I thought I could tell those stories in a stronger way, not spinning them, but telling them as authentically as you could. In other words, there's no better story than the truth. I've tried to make the truth interesting, and people have criticized me for being boring, for having a boring voice, for saying when you're trying to think about what is actually the most accurate way to say what really happened. It's easy to talk quickly and just make it up as you go along, and to talk effusively. But is that the truth? Trying to make the truth interesting doesn't mean that you are twisting it. It means you are maybe highlighting the aspects that you know resonate with people. Many truth practitioners, to their credit, are humble, understated, and not good communicators, or not communicative. Think about certain world-famous scientists that are just quite introverted. They don't like to sort of talk to the media, I guess. They don't like to give interviews. And although that's a credit to them, I don't know if it helps society much. I see a clear and present danger where the truth tellers say nothing and the liars bang their drums. And the drums get our attention, and all we end up hearing is a drum beat. There's also a saying, detective, that evil happens when good men do nothing. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. That's the actual quote. In an irony of ironies, even the true source of this quote is misattributed. No, it wasn't John F. Kennedy that said it, or Edmund Burke. It was the more obscure figure. Sorry, it's quite boring. It wasn't John F. Kennedy. It was John Stuart Mill. And he said it in 1867. And his actual words were, "Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing." And if we want to put this into a biblical context and say, well, look, there's no greater truth than the Bible, there's no greater truth teller than Jesus, well, let's do that. Proverbs 24, verse 11 and 12, Mark 10, verse 46 to 49, that also reference this notion in the Bible about good men remaining reticent. This is from Proverbs 24. If you do nothing in a difficult time, your strength is limited. Rescue those being taken off to death, and save those stumbling towards slaughter. If you say, "But we didn't know about this," won't he who weighs hearts consider it? Won't he who protects your life know? Won't he repay a person according to his work? And what that seems to be saying is, if you say, "But we didn't know about this," won't God think about that? Isn't that something that is of concern to God, that people didn't know this or that? And wouldn't God, who knows about everything, want people to know what they don't know in terms of the truth? Mark 10 tells the story of a blind man, Bartimaeus, regaining his sight. Jesus also healed a centurion's ear on his way to being crucified for a crime he didn't commit. We need to use our ears better, yes, but it also helps if the message coming out isn't only from naysayers, doubters, conspiracy theorists, and opportunists. Not all people in the media are corrupt, as I've said. Just as detectives earn a salary by being detectives and fighting the good fight, some journalists and authors have to earn a living too, and a few, choose to do so by fighting for truth. I'm one of them. Baumhover cites Jesus silently drawing in the sand as an adulteress was brought before him. I think this is an analogy to Nichol Kessinger. And yes, in that case, it was right not to throw stones. Jesus didn't really say anything. Just as it's right not to throw stones at Nichol Kessinger. Jesus was also moved to make a whip of cords and drive out merchants and money changers from the temple. So there are times when you do need to take action, and drastic action, personal action, to get involved, to get rid of corruption in the temple. And there is corruption in the temple. I'm grateful Baumhover has set the record straight on Kessinger and for calling out ridiculous conspiracies. It's just a pity it's taken him 2 years to do so. I wonder how Nichol Kessinger feels about it. I wonder how much she wishes something or someone said something earlier. This is another quote from Baumhover's blog. He writes, "Probably the most ridiculous topic I've heard about is that I retired because I'm upset over some alleged law enforcement conspiracy to cover up Nichol Kessinger's supposed criminal involvement in this case, because her father is wealthy. Stop and think for a minute about how stupid that sounds and really is. An entire family was annihilated, and no amount of money would have stopped the investigation and silenced me or anyone about some alleged law enforcement conspiracy to cover things up. The idea of that is completely idiotic." And that's the end of the quote. That comes from mentalarmor.org. I'm going to conclude now, but I'm also going to refer obliquely to what he says there. It's the position of true crime rocket science that there was a conspiracy of thoughts, and I hate to say it, because a conspiracy always sounds like it is fake news. But there are things that are conspiracies. I'll give you an example. That there's in the food industry, there's kind of like a collusion to say that certain foods are good or bad. It's a conspiracy. It's an ongoing conspiracy. It's people conspiring to sell certain kinds of things. There's a documentary about it right now on Netflix called The Game Changers. It's something that's happening right now. There have been doping conspiracies in sports, professional sports, in cycling. So it's not like conspiracies don't exist. It is true that not everything is a conspiracy, but it's also true that you can't say nothing is a conspiracy. Conspiracies do exist. So is there a conspiracy in the Watts case? Well, it's the position of true crime rocket science that there is a conspiracy, but not one that anyone has been talking about. The true conspiracy hasn't really been discussed. The true conspiracy is that wealthy interests were protected in the shutting down of the trial narrative of this case. Not by a single puny individual, not by Nichol Kessinger's father, nothing that small. Much bigger. Oil interests. The Watts case, had it gone to trial, would have been tremendously damaging, and for good reason, to the brand and bottom line of Anadarko. Well, my goodness, when last did we hear that name? A large company that was being actively wooed by two oil majors at the time of the Watts murders. Wow, you never hear about that, do you? You never hear about that side of things. And when that wooing comes to fruition, you don't hear about that either. You never hear about the Watts case and these oil companies in the same breath. Not by the media, not even on social media. A trial would have put the political hot potato of setbacks and safety into the limelight in Colorado. Something that was very much needed in 2018, in August of 2018 and November of 2018. People in Colorado know this. A trial would have put the political hot potato on kind of the barbecue grill, wouldn't it? And this was something the industry knew they could ill afford. Another way of putting it is, it suited the industry to a T that the Watts case just very quickly got kind of put into a drawer and flushed away, and no one's going to talk about it. It suits them very, very, very well. And of course, now that the oil industry's taken a huge hit, all of that protecting bottom lines doesn't seem to really have mattered. And if anything, if the case had gone to trial, maybe it would have been better for those companies wooing Anadarko to have run the other way. Another irony of ironies. A trial would have exposed other legal troubles facing the company in the area of sex in the workplace and or sexual harassment. And we know there were some lawsuits going on at the time. What happened to them? And I'm sure for some people listening, this is complete news to them. They've never heard about this. Why not? Effectively, the taxes from the oil industry in Weld County pay the salaries of Weld County. It's not hard to tie it all together. This is to say nothing of the deleterious impact of the multi-level marketing aspect on this particular case and Greater America. Just think how much good could have done if the case went to trial and they had experts talk about multi-level marketing and find out Shanann Watts' actual income in black and white on paper. Baumhover's silence isn't the reason that corruption has remained hidden, but it certainly hasn't helped expose it. It's allowed the rape of Cassandra to continue in the shadows when it could have been stymied or stopped. That's the true travesty of justice in this case. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And I'll see you guys next time.